Thank you all. So this is the discussion I promised, and I know you're all excited and ready for it because we do that here. This is the request for $120,800. Doesn't seem like a big number, does it? From cash funds to provide security services for a couple months, basically until the budget is finalized and passed and signed into law. I think it's important to understand that because it sounds like a small number, but it represents a much bigger issue. And that issue is, how do we provide security for our constitutional officers? I don't really want to take you down a really long road. I think Representative Weissman may, as often he does, discuss at great length the things that we do and how we do them. But what I will tell you is this. It's sad that we live in a world where we, and I do mean me, get on a routine basis death threats, where we get people who take our debates over policy to a level that we would find unacceptable here among ourselves. And so then we're left with a question of how do we deal with it? And the reason why I want to couch this conversation in the question of how do we deal with that is because it very, very directly goes to what we do with money. What we have here is a request from the Secretary of State to provide private security services under contract to the Secretary of State. Well, that's probably not the best way to do that, is it? Probably the best way to do that would be to make sure that the Secretary of State has available to that office the same kind of security that we all do here. When I get a death threat, a credible death threat, then I get to talk to a state trooper. That state trooper gets to say, I'm going to go check into this, and comes back, says, yay, nay, it's credible, it's not credible, we're talking to the people who sent it, whatever it might be. That is likely the best avenue we can go, because what we really do is aggregate all of those complaints, if you will, all of those threats into one place, so that those people absolutely know what's going on and have their thumb on the pulse of what is happening within the body as a whole, within the legislature, downstairs on the first floor with the executive branch, and our constitutional offices as well. So I would discuss why we're talking about a supplemental, but to do that, I move Amendment J001 to House Bill 1182 and ask that it be displayed. Lightning fast.
Thank you. That amendment has been properly moved and is now displayed to Amendment J001.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the reason why I think this is important is that the Secretary of State is actually a steward of cash funds, of resources that are there to do a job. And that job is in her department multi-layered, right? We have elections, we have business filings, we have all these different things, but people pay a fee because in Colorado, fees actually mean something. It means you pay a fee that covers the provision of that service, correct? We all agree? So that fee goes into a cash fund. And of that cash fund, there's a certain amount of administrative overhead that is allowed, because guess what? You're supposed to be paying a fee for the very thing you think you're paying a fee for. And so when we see a supplemental request like this, asking for a more cash fund to be used, that means that level has been exceeded, and now more money is needed to provide for something that we ought to have a discussion about. This $120,800 is for private security, private threat monitoring, when we already have a Department of Public Safety that does exactly the same thing. When we see things that increase the burden on our taxpayers, we should root them out. This increases the burden on our taxpayers. And so, as you heard before, we will need to have a discussion of, do we bring a bill, do we support a bill that provides security services under the Department of Public Safety for all of our constitutional officers? And that's a discussion I'm perfectly willing to have. It does matter how we do that. It does matter that we do it in the best way possible. But this is a different discussion. This says, should we grant the spending authority over these additional dollars out of cash funds? Cash funds that were collected under the auspices of a different purpose. And that was to simply provide the administrative overhead for these functions. I would say that when we see this kind of a request for a few short months, We ought to have a very scant eye toward what we're doing with those dollars and whether or not they have been stewarded well. And I would suggest that in interest of that, you support this amendment. I would ask for an aye vote on Amendment J001.
Thank you, Representative Weiss.